work in Brooklyn in our loft in Bushwick, actually. And yeah, I'm trying to think what was going on. I was painting on a table, our kitchen table, for a couple of weeks. I think you guys were gone in California, Lachlan and Lauren, and I had 2 weeks, which was very rare, to sit down and do something. At the time, in a studio, renting a studio in New York City is problematic. I'll just say that. And I had some very nice ones, but I usually coordinated the times that I had studio. What's that?
Oh my goodness.
Oh, okay. That was a nifty trick.
They sit on your liquor, sets it off.
Yeah,
I do that all the time.
yeah.
Walking without
The
the
But anyway, I started it in Brooklyn around 2017. This is all documented through my social media and my website. I posted pretty good documentation all through the process of this creation of body work. And started with a few experiments, including those small works on panel where I was just trying to figure out what the vinyl paint could do. It was a weird paint that my friends at Artists and Craftsmen in Williamsburg turned me on to, and it took me a few experiments to try to figure out what the heck it was about. And once I got started, man, I was off to the races. The second series is the Work Net series, and the third is Currents, Flow, and Reproduction. And this last phase I call the completion phase, which I hope to start in the next 6 months here. I'm looking for a big studio space in case anyone knows where they are. And which is one of the reasons we moved here, so I can make this set. There are several hundred pieces in the series. My vision for all of this was to have it as a major show, all of it together. And it's the first time I've ever tried anything like that, and I've been consistently painting on this series for 5 years. For most of my career, I've done I went through a period where I made shows every 6 weeks to 3 months. I pretty much showed everything I made for about 10 years. And as I've gotten older, my objectives have changed radically. And I've been painting now for 40 years. And so I have a very different, radically different idea of painting today than I did when I first started. Next question.
So you use the word vinyl, that's the type of paint?
That's right.
Okay.
The paint that I'm using is Lafranc M. Is it Borgios or Bourgeois? It's a French paint company that was founded in Paris in 1750 something, I think. And it is the top producer of paint in Europe, as far as the websites it says. This is an artist product, the Flash or Flashe. It's got a little, whatever that is called, and on the E, Flash. It's got an E with the ooh, so it's flashy. But they started that in the 1950s and made a big marketing push for that paint in the mid 2010s, which is how it got to me. My art store, and there are 2 of them in in Portland. I love that. It's one of my favorite stores ever. I've always had art stores like that. They always would tell me when something cool and new happened that I should try, and that's how I found the paint, and that's how I got started working with it. So as far as I can tell, it's powdered vinyl, colored vinyl, pigmented vinyl, crushed to dust, and then resolved into a pigment with the use of water-based polymers that can be dissolved that way. It's not oil-based.
So this is all water-based.
That's right. Yeah, I found out that oil-based products were killing artists that I was interested in. When I was in art school, like whether it was screen printing, if you didn't have proper ventilation and you were using different types of oil paints, I would have thought everyone knew that. I didn't know that, but I have had a number of experiences with artists over the years who've been almost martyred by their paint. And so I decided to use water-soluble paints, although I've used almost, I don't know any kind of paint. There have gotta be new ones, but I've used so many art products over the years. I like to try everything for painting. So, who had the next question? Yes.
So you said your mind, you said something in the essay about when you start painting or when an artist starts painting, the mind should be clear. What is your process or something along those lines?
That's right.
What do you have a process going into it, and how would you maintain that sort of energy that you're...
That's a great question. I love it. To me, the two most important marks on a canvas are the first one and the last one. And I would have to say that Zen painting had a big impact on me. The monks who would spend 20 years in a cave on a mountainside and come down to the temple and get a broom-sized brush and make a big circle with it on a gigantic piece of paper. To me, that was something that really fascinated me. But over the years, I've studied a lot of different, starting probably in 1988, at the encouragement of the Tarahumara Indian in Santa Fe. He said, "You think too much, you white people." He said, "You white people think too much." And he said, "So go up on a mountain and look at a beetle and clear your mind." A stink bug. We were talking in Spanish mostly. But then, and then there was a progression of mind emptying exercises in that tradition that had to do with, you would know your sophistication if you could look over a valley, say, with a clear mind, and it would be in increments of time. So it could be, if you could get to, at first 30 seconds, that was a lot. And then as we find out now that so many people practice different types of meditation, that if you get to a minute or two and you don't have a thought in your head, you're really getting pretty good. And especially in this day and age, with beeps and boops and everything vying for your attention all the time, 24/7, 365. And then looking at clouds, if you got super good, if you're an all-star, or looking at the ocean or water moving, those are also ways. I practiced all those things. And then as a martial artist, it helps you, which I've practiced for most of my adult life for sure, and also before. it really helps at some level to not have a thought in your head. You react faster. You're more in the moment. You have reflexes are shortened. Other qualities like that. And eventually there becomes an idea of, or an experience of like not thinking a thing at all, even why you're thinking. And I don't know really I've never really heard anybody talk about that, but to be capable of technical thought in a way, what is this next step really? But doing it in a mechanical way that doesn't have anything to do with like thinking of what you're gonna have for lunch or, whether your hair looks good or whatever, things like this. Does that help?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, because in painting, what I find, especially this, this is so different than what I started out painting like, and I think of it like high order math. I spent about 10 years in philosophy with the European Graduate School from 2010 till I quit. I'm never going to be a great philosopher. I'm just not. And my faculty advisor, Wolfgang Schermacher from the European Graduate School, when I finally gave up after 10 years working on my dissertation, he was obviously relieved. He was like, that's great. He was like, do you want a certificate? I'll write any kind of certificate you want. And he also said that as far as what that particular school and its recruitment of students and working them through the process of towards a dissertation, he said that I had been an exemplar student at that school, that they didn't care about the piece of paper. It's like what was Bucky Fuller, Black Mountain? It's an experimental school, and but it attracted some of the greatest philosophers of Europe, including Jean-Luc Nancy and Baudrillard, and if you're into continental theory, and my first instructor there was Friedrich Kittler, and Adorno was there, and Zizek, and all those names. So,
And this was where?
the European Graduate School, which is based in Saas-Fee, Switzerland. It's an intensive program that meets in the summers, and they also are based in New York City.
So were they primarily German?
No, they're international, absolutely.
I mean,
But
the language.
no, English is spoken, and they have such a broad program. They had Judith Butler, and they've had over 200 or 300 or 400 instructors over their lifetime, and they're filmmakers and artists and educators in all different types of fields. Just a wonderful scientists a lot, psychologists a lot.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And it was fantastic to go up in the Alps and study for a couple summers with them. The second time Lauren was pregnant with our kid, and that was something else. Thanks for coming.
You mentioned Buckminster Fuller. Were you talking about like Spaceship Earth type stuff? Like resources and just that kind of a philosophy, as far as like.
No, these guys, a lot of them initially came out of the Frankfurt School, but then also the French and German philosophy schools, the European philosophy schools, They weren't just from there, they were from the Netherlands and other places. But I was a big fan of Bucky Fuller. I worked with Buckminster Fuller Institute when I was in New York City. And Black Mountain's fantastic. I was a big fan of the poets that came out of there before I ever really knew who Buckminster Fuller was. That holistic kind of idea of civilization.
Like Thomas Hobbes or
There's so many that came out of there. And so to me, coming from like my education, and then I've always gravitated towards that kind of next level or next generation or post-hippie academy. There are other examples before them, but free radicals.
I do have a question about music and art. Over the last couple of days, we've touched base on this a couple of times.
Yeah.
And I think I understand what you're saying, but I'm wondering if maybe you could clarify what role you think, if any, music plays in art. So we obviously have the visual, and then there's tactile. But do you think there is a place for it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I always had a studio soundtrack going, and I
I was
had
going to
buddies.
ask you, when you paint,
Yeah.
does it have to be quiet or?
No, although as I've gotten older, I like it quiet. I really do. And I've had to sort of remind myself to have sound, like in the mix. But Radiohead was like a staple for, 10 years. And whenever a new album would come out, I had a buddy who would come by, another artist who would come by with a box of Krispy Kreme donuts and good, strong coffee, and we would listen to the whole record all the way through, and then he would take off and we would both go paint. And so music has always been something in my studio. But I got to the point somewhere around 2000 or somewhere in there where I wanted to be, because I was on production so hard, that when I got to the studio, because there's so much else that goes in, as you all know, like goes into making shows, that when I got to the studio, I had really to be on point every time I was there. Every minute of studio time was super valuable. And so I came up with things like Radiohead and a few other albums and stuff that if I put it on, I listened to them over and over and over, and it was like a Pavlovian thing. I could just start working. It was just a part of that process. That's how close it is. But I've been in music since I was a kid, and I was in bands with some of the shows I did. We worked with lots of musicians, and we did a lot in Nashville and recorded records with the United Artists singer-songwriter studio with King Williams. And we worked with Woodland Studios. They have like something like 1,500 gold, platinum, silver records. But what I learned was it was better for me to delegate to composers and musicians. And I got to work with all kinds of people like Jeff Coffin and I don't know, there's just so many, John Randall, all these award-winning musicians that are really brilliant performers and composers, and they were better at it than I was. That kind of became my and I worked with filmmakers on that basis, and scientists and photographers and
Well, just this piece down here, which I would call that an installation, of course.
The digital animation.
Yeah, and that's all you. So, you know, as I was listening to you talk about the music side of things, I just thought, you know, well, this composition and the visual and audio, you know, they play well together. For days now, I've been listening to it on a loop,
Right,
and I hear different things every time.
right.
And so,
So the first section of that composition that's on here, we can turn it up if you want, so everyone can hear it. It's turned off now. That was a function of the delicating. A friend of mine, Adam Cotton, created that for a show, for one of my shows. And the second part of it, I took digital tools in Final Cut Pro and started fiddle with it, which it's really tinkering, but I'm good at it because I've done a lot of it. And so I should background this a little bit to say that I was an early adopter of digital media. I started working with it as an artist in around 1991. And so over those years, I've been like a beta tester for Final Cut. I've been a beta tester for digital printing, like the Mamaki high-res UV printer, which only uses green technology. It's one of the next gen. I did a show with that in 2008 or 9 in Los Angeles, working with the guys who print out that guy who makes big whale murals. And, what was the name of that printer? I worked with a printer named Paul McLean.
you're not talking about wiring.
Yeah,
Oh.
yeah. There's a print outfit in Orange County that makes those enormous prints that are applied to the walls, and they have printers as wide as this room that make that. And they were the first. There were only 4 of those machines in the world, and after I solved the problem of how to apply that material to plexiglass, the Chinese Olympics happened about 6 months after I had that solution for a show called Timothy Yarger in Beverly Hills. The Chinese took that application and did a print that was about 100 yards long over the Coliseum entrance where the main events were being held.
Wow.
So it's, like to me, technology is like a really, I've always thought of it as something that's fun,
Yeah, it's a
really great to
platform.
do. And it's been, because I've worked with scientists all through the process, to me it's really easy to say this is science and this is art, and there's a place where they meet. And Marshall McLuhan said, for the world to survive, we have to find that place and stay there. Art is absolutely necessary in terms of it's merging again with science in the Western civilization, now the world, to find a solution for the problems we all face, like global warming. But tell that to an engineer. I've tried, I've done it, and worked with them, and sometimes you can be successful. Does that help?
It does, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't imagine one working without the other. In this particular piece, I watched it without the sound, and it was a different experience. And so,
Absolutely true. Well, I mean, we talked about how, like, my including movies, video, digital animation in galleries happened. I noticed I couldn't understand why people were so tense when they walked into a gallery in a white cube, and it just hit me one day. It's because at that time, every American household had 4 or 5 televisions. And,
I don't know. Go ahead.
okay,
Okay,
And,
thank you.
you're welcome.
Thank you.
And people had soundtracks for everywhere they went in their life, all day long. And then they walk into a gallery and there's no TV and there's no soundtrack. And it was a shock to the central system, you know, and people get nervous. There's a visceral reaction to that environment. I solved it. I said, I'm gonna put TVs in there and I'm gonna put stuff on them. And I did a bunch of experiments with that and I found out I was right. It was really a part of the problem.
Right.
And if I put a monitor in there and I could have all these artworks in there, the people would come right over and go like this and watch the monitor and everything else was might as well have been a blur in the background. So I played on that too. But the digital animation happened from having an art class at Omore College of Design in Franklin, Tennessee, of a bunch of undergrads, and they had been killing it. I had sent them home with tons of you know, an assignment every week. You know, every class they'd have an assignment. Go research X, Y, or Z, and they'd come back and they were killing it. And I asked them one week to go find stuff about motion in Western art, and they came back goose eggs. They couldn't find a thing. Duchamp knew descending a staircase, and a couple of other things.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, nothing.
I was thinking like
No, and
taller.
they, you know, and I was like, what? I berated. I'm like, you lazy bums. You know, like you couldn't find anything. All right, now I'm going to get it, so I did, and it was great. And I realized something fundamental that had to do with the beginning of the ideation around the difference between Eastern and Western art. And that was really a big breakthrough. But in terms of understanding representation of Western art up to the 20th century, what you have is the painting of David, of Napoleon on horseback, you know, in the Himalayas with elephants and, you know, him on a horse rearing up. And it was freezing a moment in time. But your mind would activate it into something like action. But it wasn't. And I was like, that is very interesting. So the question for me became how to solve the question of motion in Western art. So I didn't think anyone had really done it. And I looked at Muybridge and Eakins and other painters and realized that that's a mechanical solution with photography. But interesting, you know, that led to Taylor's scientific management. I didn't want to go in that direction, right? At all. And so I had some goals in mind with that, one of which was that each frame of an animation like this could be output as a hard copy and be good. Each frame could be good as its own digital print. And that to me was a half solution, but a good one. You know, and I did that. And started building these animations with the software Painter, which had a simple software animation feature in its suite of actions that you could do at that time, which Photoshop basically stole and turned into something. I made this in Photoshop. I don't like it as well. But you have more options and filters and other things. I was bummed. You can't really buy Painter. It doesn't have that. It's off-shotted into another software suite. So, but anyway, that's that. you know, so like animating, and then another part of that is that you have endless possibilities, infinite. All you have to do is make a variation in color, or you can render these on a pixel level so that you can make variations. You have endless potential for variations, and it can be copied endlessly and distributed that way.
So the music on here is music that you made digitally, that you made to go with the process of your,
That's what it
Of
was.
your visual art?
Well, I started working with musicians who could create environments and exhibits, and we would layer audio for 3D movement in the exhibited environment. And back when I started doing that, it was 5.1, like creating for 5 speakers set around the room and a woofer, a big subwoofer, and Pro Tools and stuff was just happening. And guys like Bob Solomon were really interested in directional sound in closed environments. So, which became what people do in museums now. So you look at something and you have your headphones on, and the paintings, you get a story about the painting as you're looking at things. It costs you about $15 in a museum, right? You walk around and look, put it on your head, and you can listen to that and try to look at the artwork at the same time, which I always found to be something you should think about a lot more than what just telling you what you're looking at. So I thought there was a lot more creative opportunity involved, which people have also discovered.
so were you a fan of Chip's music?
Chips?
Yeah.
What does that mean?